Yeah, you can.
It's
If you are implementing so that we can corner them out.
well,
Definitely,
okay.
without any reason.
Same philosophy, right? I think it's like saying management has made a change, okay? When management makes a change to a salary structure, next day's social media within the office is filled with stuff, right? Why? Two reasons. Maybe the communication as to why this thing is happening, right, is not proper. Nobody communicates saying that, you know what, we are restricting salary hikes this year to 5%. And there are very valid reasons as to why we're doing it. Not because industry is doing it, but within our organization, these are the challenges that we have, right? If there was reasonably good communication, the noise levels automatically reduce. The same thing is true between testers and developers too. Why are things happening or what needs to happen? There is a justifiable reason that you have, which testers also need to understand. And if that communication is not clear, that I think is the biggest reason as to why things fail at any level. However you want to do it, okay? At whatever level, whether it's talking test manager to test manager, whether it's test manager to team, or whether it's test to development teams, communication channels, if they are not proper, you will have throwing over the wall instances all the time, right? In disparate teams where you are organized all over the place, I think stand-up calls, those are the kind of things that you should probably run. Get developers, and usually sometimes you'll have one development lead who will come. There have to be times when all developers are there. Developers also need to feel the fact that there is somebody other than their lead who is telling them that things are wrong, right? So that synergy, once that happens, I think a lot of problems will get. Communication, in my mind, is the first and only reason why process implementation fails. Okay, I can think of no other reason. 90% of the time, communication.
Right, so can we quickly take the question from your table?
Yes, there was one on, there are two questions actually.
Only 2 minutes.
I know, but they're related. What characteristics or skills make a good tester? And how do you identify these skills? Right, so I took two questions combined into
So Diwakar will ask Prasanth to just...
One is domain skill. I think understanding of the application or the industry that you operate is very, very critical actually. I think domain skill plays a very important role. The second is the technical skill. These two would be the only two skills. And like I mentioned in the initial part, I think having programming knowledge helps these days to debate with your developers as well. So not that they would say, okay, these guys are just doing testing, but if you have the additional skill set of development, it helps a lot, but predominantly domain and technical, that's it. Communication is the third one, which is soft skills, but that will play a role, but the other two are critical.
Okay, let me, unfortunately, there's nothing like a Java test which you can assess a developer with, right? You don't have a testing test. Well, I have not seen one at least, but we give problems to solve, right? When we are looking to interview testers, when we are looking to interview people, we give them a problem to solve and say, here is a problem, this is what the customer thinks, or this is a case, right, of an application. Take a Flipkart, simple as that, right? How would you go about if you were pushed into that scenario to test this thing? And then look at the answers that come out from there. Somebody who is good thinks holistically about a lot of people. And I gauge responses depending upon the years of experience, right? I mean, obviously the more senior, the better, the more holistic coverage that is to be achieved in terms of that. But from a junior level also, I try to assess their thinking. The thinking process about how they approach a problem. It can be simple problem-solving skills. You've seen that famous cartoon, right? Interview at
sorry,
IKEA.
Diwakar, you have to quickly wrap it up.
Interview at IKEA. There is all pieces of furniture lying around there, and said the interviewer is sitting there saying, please take a seat. So he has to assemble the chair, sit on that, and then do the rest of the interview. Something similar with testing.
Great. So one round of applause for all those, who gave the questions. So we have the next session starting here, which is testing a transformation project. It will be taken by Mr. Kishore J. Kamath. May I invite him? He's a vice president testing in QUINNOX and has vast experience in advising, companies on test strategy and, various aspects. So while knowing him, we thought let's ask him to present a case study on how a banking transformation project happens and what's the role of software testing is in that project. So over to you, Mr. Kishore, and looking forward to hear from you about this case study.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Obviously, we talked about a little bit about the BFSI segment in the preceding session. And we're going to talk about a banking transformation in my session as well. Let me just understand you folks a little bit, and then I'll share something about myself. Yeah. So how many here are from Bangalore? Okay. So a vast majority of folks have come from places other than Bangalore. Great. And how many here work in the BFSI space? Okay, good. So the people here who are interested in this topic that are not from banking, which is perfect. I think the topic is generic, beyond banking, although the case study is about a bank that is going through a transformation. My name is Kishore Kamath, Vice President of Testing for QUINNOX. I've been working with QUINNOX now for 3 years. We're a services company that specializes in AMS development and testing. And I had the testing services. Most of my work life was in the US. So most recently, I've been the global head of testing for SunGard Energy. And we had an offshore unit, which was, they have an offshore unit, which is in Pune. That's how I ended up in Pune once I moved back to India. Most of my work life has been in the US. And it's an interesting observation to see global testing from different perspectives, geographically and otherwise. So that experience has been wonderful. I'd like to keep this presentation interactive. So ask me questions as we go along. And maybe, I don't know who handles the mic and the transfer of the mic to a member of this group and discussion. If that is possible, that would be great. Okay, so we're going to talk about transformations, and we're going to talk specifically about a banking transformation and what it means to do testing for such a project. Okay. So let me start off with, what does a transformation mean to anyone? Right? How does it differ from any other type of project? So anyone have any thoughts on what a transformation means to you? And this particular bank actually had the foresight to go further out in terms of how they would work with your customers. So it was a transformation for the bankers involved at the bank on how they, in the previous conversation, in the previous session, we talked about how branches are specific to a certain type of banking service. You have the NRI services somewhere, you have some overseas services somewhere, and you have, your loan management, your capital markets somewhere else. These days, people don't want to go to different branches to do different activities. Right? You want to go to this one branch and do everything in one place, and preferably do it from home on your laptop or your handheld. Right? And that's the type of transformation you're talking about. From a complete, traditional banking approach to the new way of doing things from a customer perspective, from a bank perspective. And what that does to your IT and infrastructure is it changes everything. So you just can't use your old legacy applications and try to tweak them and morph them into what you need for your customer tomorrow. You got to take the entire thing, toss it out the window, and bring in new technologies and make it happen. Now, coupled with global banking, right? Nobody no longer wants to be a bank within just one geography or within one country. You're talking about moving your operations to other countries. You're faced with multilingual challenges, right? Regulatory concerns, Every country has its own set of regulations and laws that you have to adhere to. Preferences from customers that you have to be agile and be able to adapt to. So there's a lot of thought that is required even when you spec out the system from doing a multi-country type of a rollout. And so this particular bank had a major set of business objectives of global expansion, of expanding the type of options a customer would get when they do internet banking, and keeping everything customer-centric. So the customer feels that they are in charge. So it's not just doing simply, bank transfers or writing checks on internet banking, but being able to do more, being able to transact in the stock market, being able to capture all your portfolio and positions within your single sign-on account with the bank. So that's the type of transformation that we were asked to participate in testing. So various levels of impact from a channels perspective, no longer the simple ATM and go to the branch and go to do online banking only for a certain limited set of functionality, but being able to do mobile banking, handheld devices of various sorts, a lot more with your online banking. From a banker perspective, being able to do all of it, all of the various bank activity from the branch. So a banker doesn't simply get specialized in only one area. They have to have, and they will have from a system perspective, the ability to work with various parts of the banking portfolio of services. So from an applications perspective, like I mentioned, throw out what you have, bring in something completely new, so it's completely disruptive. So one way of looking at the transformation is it's disruptive. It completely changes everything you did yesterday to a new way of doing things for you, for your customer, as well as for everyone around you, possibly your partners and vendors. So infrastructure, no longer can you take all those applications and house it in the same data center. You need to have better plans. Where you may have had 1 or 2 different applications, now you may have 20. And that's what ended up for this bank as well. They couldn't find just one application that did everything for them. They had to pick and choose the best of breed applications, which ended up being like 20 plus, and then uniting them through customizations to allow what the bank needed to get done. So this is the work of an SI, but behind the scenes, there are OEMs, vendors, who have packaged software being used by other banks. And why do I mention that? Because if you work with product vendors, they have a very specific focus. They want to ensure that their product base is broad, that any changes they make to their code, when you find a defect, has its own priority. You don't control that priority unless you're really a super big bank that can control that particular product vendor. So you essentially have to live with their priorities when you pick packaged applications and you try to slap them together through some customizations that you build on top of it. And so there are some dynamics which I will talk about as we go through testing and share with you our experience in working in this type of a dynamic space. So the traditional SDLC, of course, we talked about test-driven development earlier in this conference. What makes a transformation any different? Right? What's different about testing a transformation versus a standard project? First and foremost, like I mentioned, everything you did yesterday no longer applies. So the entire banking process, the way business is done by your bankers, by your customers, is now different. You're no longer testing modifications of a process. You are talking about a completely new way of doing things. And so your entire process has changed. Right? So it's no longer a tweak, but a complete rewrite, if you want to look at it like that. And so while you may have requirements-based testing, which we typically do in a software development lifecycle. You try to attach all your test cases to requirements and try to keep traceability so that you know you've tested everything. You also have to think in conjunction with the new transformed process, does the system meet my needs? So when we were engaged by this bank to do testing for them, they actually held us to a higher standard. They said, you need to tell me that this system is ready to go live. So you're doing business certification testing for me. You're not just testing the software to tell me that it works. You're telling me that it works to meet my business objectives of transformation. And so here's what we ended up doing. We not only designed our tests to be requirements-based, to make sure that the vendor had produced all of the changes to the code or customized the OEM code to the level needed for meeting the bank's requirements, but also built end-to-end process-based tests to ensure that when the bank follows the process that it thinks it's going to follow when it goes live, that process can be implemented with this system. And so if you go back to, when should we start with testing? And we had this whole conversation this morning. Earlier the better, obviously, test-driven development. What if the process and requirements have gaps? Now you have a situation where someone thinks, based on the requirements, they built this software, and the software will somehow adhere to a process. That's not going to fly. Every process now needs to be mapped to a requirement or a solution design that says, this is how this process works. And this is why I know when I end up on the other side of development, this is going to work. And so that